strpljenju, dakle, koji ste već s nama, nadam se da će nam se i drugi pridružiti uskoro, nadam se da ste imali ugodnu i odmornu noć. Dakle, krećemo s našim četvrtim panelom na temu suočavanje s prošlošću, izgradnje, povjerenja, ali u jednom širem kontekstu, dakle, imamo pitanja koja se tiču i uloge međunarodne zajednice, dakle, ne samo lokalne odgovornosti, nego i utjecaja koji dolaze iz šireg evropskog, rekli smo i globalnog okruženja. I uopće pitanje kapaciteta za samokritiku ili kritičko promišljanje samih sebe i prevođenje onda takvog razmišljenja i takvog osještavanja u političku akciju. To je nešto što smo jučer na drugom panelu spomenuli, dakle, da krenemo od sebe na način da djelujemo i kako to potencijalno može onda djelovati na druge, umjesto da krenemo s tim da optužujemo druge za svoju nesreću ili stavljamo sebe u poziciju žrtve i onda na taj način gradimo svoj politički program i svoj nastup. To je nešto što smo jučer otvorili i vjerujem da će se i danas o tome još govoriti. I druga stvar koju mislim da smo jučer načeli, to je u kontekstu ovih naših susreta i razgovora s istomišljenicima, kao što pretpostavljam da manje više svi ovdje jesmo, postavlja se i pitanje onda sljedećih koraka, odnosno djelovanja prema široj javnosti. Koji su to prostori i koje su to skupine i koje su to akcije koje mogu glas progresivnih ljudi, dakle, iz politike, akademije, medija, umjetnosti i tako dalje, otvoriti širom populaciju. Jučer smo čuli da građani se osjećaju, smatram da građani su neinformirani ili zanemareni i tako dalje od strane vodećih političara. Ali gdje je onda naša odgovornost u svemu tome? Evo, u tom smislu, s ovim nekim uvodnim riječima, otvaram ovaj panel, zamolila bih Mariju Kraske, koja je danas u funkciji, odnosno predstavljena danas kao političkog analitičara i novinarku, bivša šefica fondacije Arigo u Sarajevu godinama, koju vjerojatno mnogi od vas znaju, jer sam vidjela da se pozdravljate, dakle, u poznatom društvu, to share a few initial thoughts along the lines that I just introduced.
Ja, dobro jutro. Ja ću pričati na engleskom, oprostite, ali mi je lakše. I would like to start from a little bit from the German perspective, but also from the perspective of Bosnia and Herzegovina, where I worked for 5.5 years. Thank you for the introduction, Senada. I think the whole region, in my opinion, is messed up with wrong and misleading narratives about history and the past. They are not fact-based at all. I'm covering the region for more than 30 years right now, and I think the situation is worse than ever after 1995. The public discourses are reflecting a lack of facts, of knowledge, and especially of political will to acknowledge what happened in the past, what happened especially in the 90s. Also, Mr. Goldstein was referring to that yesterday. I found this really very interesting. These tendencies of interpretations concerning Mr. Tutschmann. For me, this is just a pars pro toto for a broader phenomenon. War crimes are accepted because they are nashi, they are ours. Questionable historical figures and war criminals are perceived as normal people, even as heroes, and at the same time, we are witnessing the revival of highly dangerous agendas, and we are witnessing a radicalization of the general mindset. History in general has become a sharp weapon, an instrument for daily politics and manipulations. History, especially the period of the 90s, is part of the toolbox of the nationalistic, of the extremist forces, and they are trying to finalize their agendas from the 90s with friendly support right now also from Russia. I think this is highly absurd if you look from the German perspective, that non-experts are on a daily basis dealing with historical issues about Srebrenica, about Jasenovac, and so on. We have countless examples in the public discourse on a daily basis. There is a constant flow of fake news, of wrong narratives. In this context, history is functioning as an instrument to manipulate, to stay in power, to increase instability, or to keep it at least, to poison the public discourses, etc., etc. It's a multifunctional tool with one main objective: divide and impair. It's never used, by the way, for building trust, which is our title today. And by doing this, the so-called elites are hampering any kind of starting a sustainable reconciliation process. This is my main point here. I think 30 years after the beginning of the wars, the process of reconciliation has not even started on the political level. The situation is worse than ever. The political climate is deteriorating. There is no trust, no common basis to talk. Yeah? We are on the level of politicians. There is a complete denial of international jurisdiction. The ICTY verdicts are seen as a hostile act against the own national interest. These days, it was in the news in the morning, for example, Sasha Cvietan, he's a convicted war criminal in Kosovo, was a VIP guest at the day of the opčina in Srebrenica. This shows what is completely missing here in the region. It's a catharsis, a lessons learned process. In this context, I would like to bring in, we talked about that, the German perspective, because we had this approach of pushing a catharsis after Second World War II in Germany, and I think this is really very crucial. Actually, this is the reason why I became a journalist and then a political analyst, whatever. Nazi Germany was forced to work on a democratic restart, on a fundamental reset. Luckily, that was the agenda of the Allies at that time, putting pressure on Germany. The idea was to foster a broader process of denazification. That was not only about the Nuremberg trials, right? It was rather a general approach. The Allies were pushing democratization in different spheres. One example, for example, was the media landscape. I was working for more than 10 years for Der Spiegel, the news magazine, and it's interesting because a lot of people don't know about the history of the Spiegel. The Spiegel was founded by the support of the Allies, the British guys at that time. Augstein, the leading figure at that time, he got the license from the Allies, from the Brits, to organize or to implement a news magazine that after Second World War was totally new in Germany. Or take the educational sector. I learned in school that my grandfather was part of the Wehrmacht, like many others of their generation, and that he was clearly on the wrong side of history. That was the reason why I became what I became. And all in all, we had a rather brutal shift, although we have clearly to say that the implementation was far from being perfect. I mean, we had so many high-ranking Nazis also in the 60s in higher positions. So, but at least what we had was the agenda, and that was called denazification, a clear cut with the Nazi past. All this is missing in the region, from my understanding. We have a continuation of the ideologies, partly also of the political figures themselves. And here you have a great, on the other side, you have great people in the civil society and academics dealing with the past, facing with the past. I'm impressed by the program here and by the knowledge of the people that gathered here in the conference. But on the other side, we have, in the political landscape, we have deep people that do not want to listen. There's a growing gap between the experts here or in other countries of the region dealing with the topics and the manipulators on the other side. For a good reason. I think the so-called political elites in the countries here don't want to work on trust, they don't want to work on reconciliation. They are not interested in a reset. They are fine with the status quo. And it's quite simple because they live from the past and they live from conflicts. In my understanding, it's not a problem of a democratic immaturity. I think they're just following a master plan to organize political survival. A master plan to stay in power, to exploit the resources, etc., etc., to enrich themselves.
So how to change or really attack the master plan?
Yeah, I think really part of the solution and part of the problem right now is also the international community. They are for years appeasing these troublemakers, the so-called political elites. And unfortunately also the German government, the former government, was part of that problem. So when Mrs. Merkel visited Belgrade, that was her last trip before she gave over power to the new government, she visited Vucic, and it was a symbolic act. And this appeasement has to be stopped. I mean, I'm really quite confident that the new government, also with our Green foreign minister, could be part of this change, this shift. But we have to work on that. What is really missing is the general knowledge about the history in the region. This is the main point. This is a main crucial problem.
So you think that more knowledge would generate a policy shift? Yeah,
because then we could increase the pressure, right, to act and to stop the appeasement policy. We can discuss this a little bit more in detail, but we have a main problem in Brussels, where the HDZ is lobbying on a daily basis, and the EPP, for example, is accepting these narratives, these misled narratives, as facts, promoting those. Yeah? So they are empowering these manipulators that are really very actively working in Brussels, and I think this could be part of the solution. But that just for the first one.
Thank you very much. So basically what you're suggesting is that more active and forceful sharing of the truth.
Right. I mean,
strategizing how to reach decision makers. So you think it's only the matter of knowledge, that they don't know, otherwise once they know, they will act differently.
Then we have a basis for discussions, right?
Okay.
They are just listening to wrong and misled narratives, and I mean, they're on that ground they're taking the decisions in Brussels and in Berlin. And that's the reason my recommendation would be we have to go out of these conference rooms. Yeah? We have to go to Berlin and to Brussels where the decision makers are, to really say what happened in the 90s. And that the HDZ agenda is far from being democratic, for example, right? That Bosnia is under attack from several stakeholders, from inside, but also from the neighboring countries, and it is the parallel to the 90s. And a lot of people, a lot of MPs in Brussels are not familiar with these facts. And this is the point.
This is the problem. Okay, thank you very much for your first intervention. Stefan Gashi is a human rights activist from Kosovo. We have here several questions that you have read if you want to reflect on them, but also feel free to continue along with Marion just opened the responsibility of the international community. It's really the matter of knowledge of how to fight from within, or from without, or where the forces meet, progressive forces of those who have the same agenda, in your opinion, also reflecting the situation in Kosovo and what are the main challenges there.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you, Paolo, for putting me a human rights part. Gosto moj hrvatski je slabo, a srpski ne govorim. We were last year, Balsa put together a similar group in Herzegovina, and I was staying at his house. He has a nice house in Herzegovina, and then found out that he inherited it from his grandfather. And then somebody asked me, Stefan, what did you inherit from your grandfather? I said, apart from these problems with the Serbs, not much else. But now we're basically facing these problems that have been accumulated for decades. Each generation contributes to the problems bring in more, but very few of us deal with resolving these issues. And then, you know, these problems start as small grievances, and then they turn into myths, and then become part of our national narratives. And then we're very generous about creating narratives about each other without much interaction actually with each other. Now the panel asserts what they should do, how they should apologize, they tell us, but we actually don't take any steps ourselves. And when I talk to people, why is it so difficult to acknowledge the suffering of the others? It's usually clear that they kind of try to avoid this feeling of collective guilt and collective responsibility and collective blame. And a friend once told me that if we acknowledge that we did something, these guys then would damage our reputation. And I told you, really think our reputations will get worse. But then, you know, we have, as you mentioned, our societies are very centralized. So basically the narrative is created and controlled by the politicians. So everything is top down. So this is why perhaps our civil society activities haven't been very, very successful. And then why we still don't have a process of reconciliation with the Western Balkans? I think it's because we still don't have peace. I mean, if you mentioned it now, there is a book about this 25 years of Dayton agreement. That was pretty much a ceasefire. Kosovo and Serbia now don't have a peace agreement. We were talking last night in Serbia's constitution. Kosovo is part of Serbia, there are claims. So I think we would need some peace agreements and then to begin the reconciliation process. We have now ethnic communities. I also mentioned yesterday, Janša's non-paper, which he plagiarized Hashim's and Vučić's idea. We still don't know we have communities like in Serbia in Kosovo's north. They still don't know in which country they would end in 10 years. And it's as long as the conflict between Kosovo and Serbia remains open, the change of borders could happen. We might have a Grenell back or a Trump back. And also this idea, it's not so unpopular, even in Kosovo. Like people would say, if this gets us a deal with the Serbs, why not? What's 1,000 kilometers square? So then we were looking in our activities kind of what kind of cases, how can we do this reconciliation process. Look at some you have, for instance, in Australia they have this National Sorry Day as recognition for the discrimination against the indigenous people. In Canada, just a few years ago, they gave 1 million square kilometers to the indigenous people in the Arctic land. So 1 million square meters, what is this for Serbia? Give us 10,000. and resolve this. Then we have in most cases, we have an apology by the leader of the nation. And we've had those, Bill Clinton apologized in Africa for the role of the white Americans in slavery. We have President Tadić that apologized for issued some kind of apology for slavery. I don't know if it was mentioned genocide. And so this is kind of the most regular, but there are different ways maybe than Pope John Paul II would apologize to the Jews of the church. So there are a few cases, but I think we can't even start it until we have some kind of peace resolution, some conclusive peace agreements, especially Kosovo, Serbia, and in Bosnia. And now I'd say the most successful stories are Montenegro and Macedonia, with the integration of the kind of reconciliation. Macedonia, especially, was very fast after what they had a short, brief civil war. Now in Montenegro, when we all thought they would have problems with their minorities, now they have problems with the Serbs. But then who doesn't have problems with the Serbs? So it's not very unusual, but these, I'd say, are the two cases. But the story of the Balkans, I think it could go either way. It could get worse, could get better, as long as we have these two open conflicts.
Okay, this is the importance of duration, and basically the uncertainty keeps people in their positions because they don't move they don't know what is awaiting them, and therefore better to stick to what we know rather than experiment with the unknown. And so the sense of trust or some sort of security that things will not disrupt, that states will not disappear, or that new conflict will not erupt, in your opinion, would be an impetus or motivator to make the experiment with more democratic policies or political trust. So who is responsible? Kurt Seeger is political analyst. He's he co-founded the Democratization Policy Council. He just published an article in co-authorship with Toby Model in Foreign Affairs, where basically you wrote what we are discussing today, reflecting that this is part of the role of the international community, and you looked in particular at Bosnia and Herzegovina and how the external influence is impeding or jeopardizing any progress in the country. But in line with what we had just heard, and also in line with your question yesterday, we spoke a lot about the responsibility of the international community. Marino said that the denazification in Germany happened because of the external push. Why don't we have the external push in the case of the Balkans?
I mean, to take, we were moving in the right direction until we stopped. I think there was a decision of, is this close enough? Sorry. There we go. The idea about 15, 16 years ago was that European Union enlargement was going to solve everything. Those incentives were going to continue what we had done through military intervention. And so to connect it with what you had mentioned earlier, you know, the real denazification wasn't really completed until after 1968 and really going to Warsaw and so forth. But it would not have happened had there not been the denial of an attempt at any possible revival. That's what we failed to do here.
You failed to do what?
We failed to deny the possibility of what Svetlana just talked about. Effectively, the message is it's not over. Every unfulfilled agenda, of which there are many in the region, now seem possible in a way that 20 years ago they were not. Because, I'll give you the concrete example that Toby and I tried to refer to in our article. Once upon a time, not very long ago, the idea, you know, when I arrived in Sarajevo in 2005 to work for Patty Ashton as citizen president, it was less than 10 years after that. The presumption was nobody was afraid of renewed conflict. If you were a minority returnee, you may very well be afraid about your local environment. But the idea of a conflict with metastasis was not feared because the presumption was if you try, it will stop you. If necessary, it will kill you if you try to reinitiate conflict. We control the territory. We're going to prevent any violent action. Now, you have all the legal substrate or legal structures that allow this prevention of violence and prevention of nationalist agendas is still there, but the will to employ them is gone. And we advertise that. So effectively, and not just in Bosnia, but region-wide, we accept these nationalist agendas. I think Open Balkan is a clear example of that. So a few points to the general themes that you're talking here. One, I get very frustrated when the term reconciliation is used, not because of the actual content of the term, but usually it's a cop-out by the international community. The reason this hasn't happened, again coming back to what you said, Stefan, is from the top down, they don't want it. Their business model is to keep people divided and keep people scared. Without that, they cannot, the political elites of the region cannot remain dominant. So the re-traumatization that we've seen with the conflict in the Russian invasion of Ukraine, that was just an accelerant to a process that was already happening. Re-traumatization happens all the time. That's why control of the media is so important for these guys. So that's a vital part of the business model. And the West has effectively licensed official nationalism, which comes with, you know, organized crime, because it's a political, business, organized crime, media nexus. That's the name of the game. Open Balkan is understandably seen by, in Bosnia, Montenegro, elsewhere, as the face of Srpski's fabric, the economic dimension thereof, of a greater Albanian, greater Serbian co-prosperity sphere. Admittedly, from Rama's perspective, it's about getting, you know, there's nothing wrong in theory, in practice even, with economic reintegration. It's a question on what terms and who it serves.
Mm-hmm.
It's because it's a reintegration for most of the region. Albania is the part that has to be integrated. So you see that. You see it with the Bosnia-Herzegovina election law, constitutional reform discussion as well. So in effect, the European Union led Western policy. The Americans have gone along with this for the better part of almost 20 years now. Has been to cover up a policy failure with collaboration with the existing political elites. And they will choose pacification over progress anytime they have to choose.
But why do you think this is the case? Or why did you said we were going in the right direction until we stopped?
Mm-hmm.
Because the Balkans are not relevant, because they are insignificant, because there are other more important topics on the agenda. And is there a way to really install interest for stabilizing in the right way this region?
There are a number of contributing reasons why we are where we are, starting from the point of great optimism after the Big Bang enlargement in 2004. The presumption was, you know, our elites talk to your elites because your elites are completely democratically accountable, and therefore we don't need to develop a constituency at the popular level, because that's your job. Of course, it was never in the interest of the political elites in the region to develop that constituency. So, in effect, you start there. Then you have the economic crisis, where attention did shift. But the Americans checked out, largely. And then it became, you know, a question of the bureaucratic level, not wanting to tell their bosses or the bosses' bosses that thing that we told you we had under control, we don't have under control, we need your help. To get to your question, Ukraine gives us an opportunity, because now finally you have a lot of things that had been stuck as immovable objects now have been moved. I mean, you're having Germany arm Ukrainians after a lot of kicking and screaming. So you have this paradox. In the Western Balkans, and particularly in Bosnia-Herzegovina because of the structure, you have more capability of the West. If the West is united, and that had been the conditional that had not been met prior to Ukraine. If the West is united, we're more empowered to prevent bad things from happening and potentially create a catalyst for good things happening than anywhere else on Earth. And yet, we're allowing our agenda to be determined by the Joviches, Dodins, Spegoviches, and so on. Because to shift from that, for which there would be no political cost, would be a tacit admission of failure. And that, I think, is the biggest impediment. There wouldn't be a political cost, honestly, to a policy shift. Most of our populations wouldn't even know it.
Sure. We'll continue on this and what and if and how long Ukraine will present this window of opportunity. Let me turn to Tamara Zajović iz Centra za nenasilnu akciju Sarajevo Beograd, koja daje odnosu na sve ovo što smo čuli sa jedne šire meta razine diskusije. Idemo sada na vrlo usku lokalnu ili fokusiranu temu rada na pomirenju u ovom kontekstu nedostatka mira, ako to tako mogu reći. Dakle, kako to izgleda iz vaše perspektive nekoga ko radi, dakle, direktno s ljudima koji su ratovali jedni protiv drugih i sad pokušavaju naći povjerenje i zajednički život.
Hvala. Pozdrav svima, ja ću na mašinu.
Hvala na pitanju. Da, Hrvatskom. Da, ja ću govoriti o hajde kažem, tom nekom lokalnom nivou suočavanja s prošlošću i povjerenjem. Naime, Centar za nasilnu akciju jako dugo, skoro 2004.